to order. Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Committee Member Chu,
Here.
Committee Member Holmes,
Here.
Committee Member Hall,
Here.
Committee Member McClure, Committee Member Slot, Committee Member Teed,
Here.
Committee Member Sang. I do see that she is joining us right now by Zoom. And Chair Levinson.
Here. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We have the minutes for March 7th. I assume everybody's had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any questions about the minutes that anyone has? Additions, deletions?
Yes, I
Yep.
have one, my recollection, which may or may not be correct, but on item, on item 4, I thought that the motion also encompassed a couple of the categories of administrative fees that were reflected on the ledger report, the Measure B ledger report. Being, I think, the trustee fees and the audit fees. I know we discussed them. I thought they were encompassed in the authorizing motion.
I don't remember. Anybody have any clarity on that? Dan?
I think we can add that language for Mr. Holmes. I think Mr. Holmes had been concerned that we weren't expressly telling the public that we pay administrative fees to HDL. So we can add that into the motion. I think he did try to incorporate that.
Okay, good. Anything else? So with the addition of language to deal with administrative fees, can I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Who was that?
I think it was Tamara and James.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Next on the agenda is the whole purpose of our meeting, which is the reserve policy for Measure B. So I'm just going to hand that over to Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee asked that we wait till toward the end of the fiscal year so that we could see if Measure B's revenues were continuing to track along the projections that our sales tax auditor HDL had provided. And in fact, they have continued to track. Sales tax and the associated transaction and use tax under Measure B both remain quite robust, even despite recent inflationary factors sort of tempering enthusiasm for the economy nationally. The Marin economy continues to meet predictions. HDL feels confident that that trend will continue, although they think growth in revenues is unlikely. They think the amounts that we're seeing now are amounts that we'll continue to see for the foreseeable future. And so that means the fund should be realizing revenues on the magnitude of $2.9 to $3 million annually. And as we've discussed in the past, the debt service commitment of the fund is 1.6 million annually. So we're building up cash, and the first step to putting that additional money to work is to establish a reserve policy. After reflecting on our last discussion and going back and discussing it with Julian Skinner, our Public Works Director, our recommendation is that the fund hold on to $1 million. It's slightly more than we had talked about at your last meeting. We talked about 800,000. The reason we think it should be up a little bit more is just to provide a little additional cushion as we watch fluctuations in asphalt prices over the next couple of years. For the first time, we are observing the cost of asphalt affecting our projects, although in the grand scheme of things, it's not a dramatic impact, and Julian can speak a little bit more to that if you would like. But we think $1 million reserve is more than sufficient the way this fund is trending. And then as part of the recommendation, we are recommending the rest of the cash sit a little longer because the public works staff is in the process of updating our stormwater system master plan. And we think that's the most likely investment that we will be bringing to you and then the city council for Measure B monies above the debt service for the road program. Julian, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I can go a little bit more into detail on some of the project costs. I think as we last met, we had a handful of projects queued up for summer of 2022, and we had to that point on the first 3 years worth of projects experienced a net savings of about $2 million versus what we had planned for when we developed the $25 million 5-year plan. So through the first 3 years, we had spent about $11 million doing about $13 million of worth of streets. So a net savings of 2 million. And so we had said that, we anticipated moving forward, costs were going to go up a little bit. We have some trickier projects coming up. We're paving Magnolia, Doherty, and East Sir Francis Drake, all of which have pretty significant traffic impacts and will need some extensive traffic control work. So we anticipated the cost would go up. And I think we shared with you that we didn't think we were going to experience quite the savings we had through that first 3 years of projects, but we still felt pretty comfortable with the cost estimates that we had developed during the 5-year plan. So as we stand today, all of the projects for summer 2022 have been bid out, and we have real pricing with the exception of one, which is the local streets portion of it, what we're calling Measure B Group 4. Magnolia, Doherty, and East Sir Francis Drake have all been bid. We have real numbers now from the contractors. Those bids all came total within about 2% of what we had budgeted for in the Measure B plan. So unfortunately, not the 10 to 15% savings that we saw during the first 3 years of the program, but fortunately not an increase in cost over what we had budgeted for. So the bottom line, when you add that in, the one unknown is a $4 million estimated project on the local streets, and there's still 6 million of that 25 million initial unaccounted for. So we fully expect that we're not going to have any additional funding needs to complete the Measure B program. And if things follow suit, we'll end up somewhere in the $2 million range under that 25 million set aside. That's kind of where we're at today, the latest on the true costs of the paving program.
So the $1 million reserve, what can those funds be used for?
The money we would be holding in reserve in Measure
Yeah.
B?
Yeah.
Legally, it can be used for any general fund expense that the council chooses. But because they've established a specific fund, they have to make specific decisions about what they want to spend the money on. To date, they've aligned their spending decisions with this committee's recommendations, which have been consistently to do the debt service payment and to build up a cash reserve. I think now, though, with the cash reserve being so large, what we would probably want to talk to them about is, what do you want to do with the balance above $1 million, which we project at the end of the year will be about $3 million of excess funds. So based on what the council passed in a resolution to kind of guide them in terms of use of this money, their emphasis has always been on public safety and infrastructure. And right now we have a happy marriage of those two because we have the problem of our storm drain system, which is both an infrastructure challenge and a public safety issue because it prevents flooding and helps with clean water issues. So I fully anticipate that's where we're headed in terms of use of this excess money. The council's made it a high priority for the next several years to invest in the storm drain system. So I'd be really surprised if that isn't where they want to look first. We're basically scraping every dollar right now that we can for storm drains. Julian has authorization to take a considerable amount of the money we got from the COVID relief fund and put it into storm drains because that was one of the infrastructure categories the federal government identified. But what we got from the federal government is about 1/10 of what we need to actually fix the system. So, and we'll know more exactly what that cost to fix the system is when the storm drain master plan is finished, hopefully later this year.
Comments?
How does maintenance, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
how does maintenance figure into the equation? I know that there has been considerable concern that we have sufficient funds to maintain the roads, and if memory serves, and Julian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the thought was that at the end of 5 years it would be time to start repairing them again so they wouldn't sink down below a problematic point. So could you tell me how the maintenance fits in, and if whether we should consider any of this reserve as a sort of a maintenance reserve possibly?
So I'll jump in first because that's more of a financing question. So the maintenance program that we've developed or mapped out for the new investment in the roads currently projects for roughly $1 million a year needing to be spent on roads. We are realizing roughly $1 million in various revenue sources that are unrelated to Measure B. The most notable is gas tax, but there's also a handful of other state dollars that come in to the city that are earmarked to be spent on roads. So as of today, we are getting sufficient monies from other sources to invest in our maintenance program. We do think that if costs grow in our maintenance program, Measure B would have to be one of the ways that we deal with any shortfall that we might have in these other revenue sources. But at this time, those aren't materializing, and given the performance of the fund, we can look at this issue annually. We don't really need to build a second or larger reserve for that purpose. Jillian, you want to add anything?
Not really. I think you covered everything. Our capital, when we developed the capital program this year that the city council just adopted, it does include 4 years out of pavement maintenance programs. And if you look at the budget, you can see that we have the funds that the city manager just talked about plugged into those maintenance projects moving forward. And that's based on our consultant's analysis of the condition our streets will be in at the end of the 5-year program and the types of maintenance work that we would be doing on them moving forward, which is crack sealing and thinner overlays. We won't have the need to be removing and replacing asphalt for some time because we have our streets in such good condition. But it's not time to put the shovels down, so to speak. You've got to keep maintaining those streets, keep filling the cracks and repairing broken areas and putting thin overlays over them so they stay in good condition longer. So even though we're going to have, a fairly what's considered a very good category of street when we're finished, it's still a considerable amount of money, about $1 million a year to keep them that way. But as it is now with the different funds, and they do fluctuate, some of them are sales tax, so they'll fluctuate each year, but we're projecting that we should have funding to match the need. And as the city manager said, every year we'll have to regroup and take a look, and our streets will get reevaluated, and we'll see how they're deteriorating and see how the dollars are coming in.
Okay, thank you.
So if we keep this $1 million reserve and 2 years down the road, we find that we're $1.4 million short. So that's 1 million plus 400,000. The money that we've then given to the city council for the storm drain, can we take some of that back if we needed it?
Well, that depends on whether it's been spent, I suppose, is the answer. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way. So if our sales tax consultant is correct and $3 million is coming in every year, and our commitment for the next 20 years is to spend 1.6 million on debt service, it means that every year there's $1.4 million to assign. And what Julie and I are saying is that 1.4 million, the first question each year will need to be, are the funds available for the road program sufficient, or do we need to ask for some of that 1.4 million or whatever that delta is every year? And then after that, we'd have whatever's left and we'd have to say, what are we going to do with this money? The reserve should really only be there for a catastrophic situation. So for whatever reason, we really had a massive collapse of the sales tax economy, which would mean there's a pretty serious problem nationally for us to probably experience that. I see Larry has his hand up.
Yeah, tying us several of these comments together. The original projections, that Julian mentioned is what we discussed like back in 2017 or 18 after Measure B passed. And it was probably going to be about $1 million a year to maintain, the roads going forward after all the rehabilitation's been done. I guess if that is the first priority over the storm drains, even though storm drains were considered, the next set of infrastructure projects, would you calculate the reserve differently to also account for any potential shortcomings in any funding sources that would fund the maintenance?
I think we could, I think if that happened, I think what Larry's talking about is suppose the cost of maintenance escalates dramatically. I think then we're going to come back and say, maybe this reserve needs to be higher. But the only costs that fluctuate for the next several years, Julian can correct me if I'm wrong, are really, labor and the cost of asphalt. Everything else is kind of what it is. So asphalt's gone up a little bit, but that's actually more about demand, I think it is, than anything else. Last time I checked in with Julian, people are having to get in line now to buy asphalt because everybody's doing road projects. And so, labor's whatever labor is, but we can always revisit a reserve policy. It's not a static policy. I just think we're going to be holding too much cash if we make this reserve too large, and the taxpayer deserves to see this money being put to work.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And wasn't there some kind of statutory requirement, some cap at some point? Anyway, regardless of that though, if do you plan on doing any kind of financing for the storm drains, or is it going to be pay as you go each year as you identify the projects?
So I grilled Julian a bit on that, and he probably will nod his head or confirm here, but pay as you go is that storm drains lend themselves more to pay as you go, because if you can't do the systematic approach we did to the roads. You got to kind of go through, prioritize. Storm drains, some of them are under the street. Okay, we know one way to fix those. Some of them are on top of the ground on a hillside. That's a different project in its entirety. So it's really much more of, let's try to generate a 7-figure amount every year for the next 10 years or so and get these things up to speed. There's also only so many we can do in a year. I think Julian's got authorization now to spend quite a bit of money from the federal money, and we can't do it all this year. There's just no, there aren't enough people who do storm drain repairs to commission that much work at once.
Yeah, okay, well, that indirectly answers, where I was kind of going with it, because if you would have a second commitment, then using Measure B funds, then it would be hard to determine what the appropriate reserve is. But if you're going to go pay as you go, then it can be adjusted each year.
That's right. Every year we revisit this question.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? What do you need from the committee?
I am seeking your concurrence in the recommendation I'd like to take to council, which is to establish a reserve policy of $1 million for the Measure B fund.
I have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Our current debt service is about 1.6 million. Is that, are those interest rates locked in? Is there any contingency that would cause that interest, that debt service to increase?
They're locked in, and I won't use the word fixed. We've talked before. The way that financing's done, the interest rate we pay in each year is slightly different, but it's all fixed interest rates across the entirety of the debt.
So you're pretty confident, or your consultants are pretty confident that that 1.6 million is not going to inflate in a material way.
That's right. The only way we can change that equation is to pay it down faster. And we can't actually do that for the first 10 years. We're not allowed to pay extra against it for the first 10 years. And
Okay.
I'd have to bring the finance team for the debt service back to explain the legality of why that is. But I have that number in my head. It's 10 years before we could pay stuff down early.
I remember that, yeah. And HDL is holding to its position that the sales tax is not going to be materially diminished.
Yeah, they think the Measure B fund will steady and kind of plateau where it is now for next several years, which is about $2.9 to $3 million annually, which is pretty incredible since we built this whole model on 1.8 million.
Okay.
And wasn't it cars? And wasn't it cars mainly that was? I really enjoyed getting a copy of the document that was the sales tax survey and graphs. And that was mostly cars and hotels, wasn't it?
Those are big drivers. Shipped goods into Larkspur is a big part of it. Every time somebody orders anything on the internet that you have delivered to Larkspur, Measure B applies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so unless somebody else has a comment or a question, is it the sense of the committee that we support the $1 million reserve? Kind of nod your head if you think so. Okay, I think you have our support on this.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We're going to probably take this to the council in August. Their next meeting's on July 20, and that's a very busy meeting. So I think we'll probably take it to the first Wednesday in August, which is August 3rd. So
it would be great if you could notify the committee when you're doing that, or even email us a copy of the specific recommendation that you're making.
I know Allison is quietly listening in the background, so I'll make sure that she.
Yeah, the item that goes to the council.
Yeah. Yep. She's
Okay.
thumbs up. She heard you.
That would be great.
I see Carl has his hand up.
It's time
that
now.
That was just confirming the.
Oh, to confirm your vote. Got it. Thanks,
Yeah.
Carl.
Okay, it's time
Do we want
for,
to address the storm drain? Do we want to express any opinion on that, Mr. Chairman?
I think, James, for now, because we're not actually going to make a recommendation to specifically spend it on the storm drains until we have that master plan done, I'll bring that as a more specific and detailed item so you have a chance to see Julian's analysis.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it's time for public comment and open time for committee members. Anyone have something they want to contribute to the common good? I would just like to say that we were away for the weekend, and we drove back late Sunday afternoon and the bridge was open. I was stunned. All those orange, monstrosities were off on the side, piled up. It was just absolutely a delight to see that we're actually getting to the completion of this project.
Well, I'll use that as a chance to tell the committee that on July 20, Julian will be providing to the council a historical overview of the bridge project, going back before he and I were with the city all the way to now. And the council and some past council members are going to do a brief ribbon cutting that will video, because we don't want to close a bridge for more than 5 minutes. So we're going to have everybody run out, cut a ribbon and run back. They're going to do that this week, actually. So
there was one guy who worked for the bridge company who I would chat with off and on. And he verified something that I thought as well, that if it ever becomes clear that we're going to have some sort of nuclear confrontation, head for the bridge, because it's probably the strongest bridge anywhere in the world. Nestle yourself underneath and you'll be safe.
So I have a quick question since you guys are all aligned. And Julian, you may have already, and Damien, you've already addressed this, but just on the Magnolia project, I think we had that was budgeted for like 3 million. What did that finally come in at?
The Magnolia that was budgeted for 3 million came in at like 2,995 or something like that. It was within 2% of the engineer's estimate.
So spot on. And then when is the rest of because you had June, so we're now in June. When is the paving for the rest of Magnolia and the rest of the last section scheduled to kick off?
Yeah, so Magnolia, the contractor has until school gets back into session to pave all those streets. We basically set it up so that he couldn't start until school was out of session, and he has to finish by the time they're back in session, which I think is August 17th or something like that.
Yeah.
So he'll fit it in that window somehow.
Okay. And the rest of the roads will be done then after when that's priority is done.
Yeah, Doherty will be the same time frame, obviously, because it also has a school traffic issue. And then East Sir Francis Drake is night work. So that paving schedule isn't so dependent on traffic. And then the other streets that are kind of the south of downtown, West Baltimore, Monte Vista, the remaining local streets will probably be right in the September, maybe stretching into October session. But we wanted to make sure Magnolia and Doherty got paved when school was out, so we had less traffic issues.
Yeah, makes sense. Great. Thank you, guys.
Terrific. All right, when is our next meeting? Do we know?
Allison, can you remind me when the next?
I'm checking the calendar. It's a date in December, if I'm remembering correctly.
I want to say it's the first Monday. Does that sound right?
That's correct. December 5th, 2022
December 5th. Okay,
at 6 p.m.
great. All right, well, we look forward to hearing more good news in December, that all the bids went out and things are moving along. It certainly is nice to ride around Larkspur on some really nice roads. So I think you guys have done a tremendous job. Now that the bridge is done, you're going to be bored, but we'll leave that for another day. All right,
We have a few buildings to fix. We've
All right.
got some stuff to do.
can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I move. I'll second then. I'll let Larry move. I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you in December.
Bye-bye.